What is up, guys? Welcome back to Will of DDT. My name is Anonymous, and today, after a very long hiatus, we are bringing you a deck profile. Today we are going to be covering my list for Black Yellow Luffy. It's been a long time since we've uploaded a deck list or guide, but you know, we just wanted to get our list straight for OP7, do some testing, and I think we're finally at that point where we can share these lists with you guys. So yeah, jumping right in, this is going to be my Black Yellow Luffy list. I have loved this deck. I have not really found much appeal in any meta deck since Red Green Law, but Black Yellow Luffy kind of makes me feel like I'm playing that all over again. So really loving this deck. Recently went top 16 with it at the Sully's Abode case tournament. If you're following us on our channel, you might have seen some gameplay from that. If you haven't seen it, check it out. Really dope and exciting games. But yeah, that was great practice because, I mean, it's a very sweaty, very competitive environment. We've got people who have won Treasure Cups, regionals, top 8 Nats player over there. So yeah, I was happy to see that the deck performed well in that environment. And just today, I actually won first place at a sealed event. So I got my sealed boa. That was a constructed format. So yeah, I was able to win that as well, undefeated with Black Yellow Luffy. So yeah, guys, without further ado, not going to keep this too long. Let's jump right in. And yeah, as I lay out the cards, I am going to talk a little bit about different matchups and how you should handle them, because I really do think this is a meta of knowing your matchups. You have to approach the games really differently depending on what leader is sitting across the table from you. So yeah, let's dive right in. Let's take a look at Black Yellow Luffy. Alright guys, let's jump right into the list over here. So we are going to start off with the obvious stuff. I don't think there's going to be any debate about most of these cards. So we are running 4 copies of the 5-cost Blocker Sabo. This is just an insane card. Obviously, it's going to give us KO immunity against Lucci, and this deck is capable of cycling it over and over again. And more importantly, I think more so than any other deck this card is played in, the draw 2, trash 2 is really important here because we want a lot of our big big brothers in trash. So Sabo is going to allow us to do that while just drawing deeper into our deck for the more important pieces that we actually need. We are running 4 copies of the 5-cost power-up Luffy. This Luffy allows you to trash one of your life in order to draw a card, and then he becomes an 8k. Without any Dawn invested, becomes an 8k unit. 5-cost 8k is just insanity, dude. And yeah, this card's going to be, again, super useful, just probably the best attacker that you have. 8k is also really relevant because Law is not able to easily bottom deck that. He needs to use 2 resources if he wants to bottom deck this Luffy after you've powered up. So yeah, that's really good to have something that's above the 6k stat line. Then we are running 3 copies of Egghead Luffy, Rocket Luffy, Jetpack Luffy, whatever you call him. I've heard him called so many different things. But yeah, this card is just goated. It's really, really helpful, again, in the Law matchup. Previously, the Law matchup was very difficult for this deck. Now, like, almost single-handedly because of this guy, it becomes a lot better because he allows this card, for those of you who don't know, activate main, you can trash this character, and if you've got 2 or less life cards, which you almost always will, you can KO one of your opponent's 4 costs or less. So this helps kill the Shurayas, this helps kill the Bon Clays, just any threats that are in your way. In any other matchup, when you're going for game, this is just really helpful. You can quickly drop this, blow up their last remaining blocker, and then just blitz for life. Very, very helpful card. And then afterwards, you get to draw a card. So it helps replenish hand size. So, I mean, all of these are offering draw power. Sabo is draw 2, trash 2, so net 0 in terms of how much you gain, but you get to cycle deeper in your deck for those pieces that you need. This Luffy is going to trash your life, which you don't want, to draw you a card, which you do want. And then this Luffy is going to KO a opponent's unit and then draw a card. So really, really good. You cycle through your deck like monstrously fast in this deck. It's actually a very really well-oiled machine. And then we are running 2 copies of the 5-cost Ace. I really wish I could run more, but this deck list is just super tight. So this Ace, for those of you who don't know, on play, if you've got 2 or less life cards, this character gets Rush. Again, almost always going to have Rush, but unfortunately, I just could not afford to run anymore. This is the least specific card. This is the only one out of these Big Brother lineup that does not have any draw power, and it doesn't serve any specific function. It's a really good card, don't get me wrong, but it's not serving any specific function, whereas all of these other ones are like necessary in Some in specific matchups, some just all the time, like this guy. The other cards are just more valuable than Ace, which is why we had to cut Ace. And also Ace is the only one that doesn't have counter. But the thing is, once you get one Ace in trash, you can pretty much recycle it as many times as you want, as long as you have the little Ace or an 8-cost Moria. So yeah, I figured 2 is enough to where you'll see him, and in my experience, it's been working great. I do also really like this card in the Law matchup once again, because it just, it's a 7k, it's right above that magic number where Law can't easily remove it with just one Gordon or Raise Max. He's gonna have to use double resources if he wants to bottom deck it. A lot of times they'll just reduce it and then swing at it after it's 4k, and that you will happily take. Just put it in the trash, you'll be able to get it back later. So then we will show you the little brother lineup. Again, nothing too surprising here. I've got 4 of the little Sabo, 4 of the little Luffy, and last but not least, 3 again of the little Ace. Unfortunately, we had to cut one, but you know, again, in my opinion, Ace is the least specific in terms of like what function he serves, but I really do like 3. I feel like you see it more than enough, and I will say I like to hang on to one of these until the end game, because end game, having just that clutch 7k rush that you can just pull out on your opponent, and it doesn't even cost you anything. Spending 2 Dawn on this guy doesn't matter because he'll buff your leader in the process. It just feels really good. So yeah, 3 Ace is more than enough, and again, I do like to save one as my pun intended ace in the hole for that final turn when you want to push for game. Always nice to have one of these in hand, so I'm reluctant to counter with that. I'd rather counter with the others, usually speaking. And then we are running 3 copies. Oh, you see the Moria there, my bad. We're running 3 copies of Blocker Viola. This is a really, really neat card, guys. She is a 2-cost blocker, which in and of itself is kind of valuable. But on play, you get to look at all of your opponent's life and rearrange them in any order, which is very clutch in the NL matchup, and I will definitely play this early game against NL, just so I can sort their triggers and make sure that they don't get any advantage off of me just for free by just through trigger nonsense. But I usually am using the second effect. You get to turn all of your life cards face down. So for those of you who don't know Black Yellow Luffy's leader ability, probably should have started with that, but when you put 2 Dawn on Black Yellow Luffy, you get to heal 2 life if you're at 0. If you're currently at 0, you get to heal 2 life, but you have to put 2 of your 5-cost brothers into your life face up. And by the rules of this leader, if your life is face up, it doesn't go to your hand, it doesn't trigger, it goes straight to the bottom of your deck. So healing 2 kind of sucks if you're just gonna leave the life face up, because then your opponent can just swing at you pretty aggressively and you know, make sure that those cards get bottom decked, and that does not feel good, because those are resources that are not going to your trash. You're not gonna be able to heal with those brothers again. So you want your 5-cost brothers to go to your hand ideally. So in the mid game, there is often a time where you can't make a play. You can't play your little brothers or the right little brothers to play your big brothers that you do have available out of your life. So it is really nice to have Viola, because you can just put 2 Dawn on leader, you can heal with whichever brothers you have, and then you can just slam down a Viola, flip both your lives face down, and then that way you went net 0 in terms of hand advantage, because when your opponent strikes at those life, they are going to go right back to your hand. If an Egghead Luffy was in there, he will trigger. And since those life are face down, you still know what they are, so you can still make an 8-cost Moria play off of them if your opponent chooses not to swing at those 2 face down life. You still know what they are, so you can play your Moria and then use the little brothers off of Moria to still get your leader to 9k. But if that doesn't happen, if your opponent does swing at those life, at least they're going to return to your hand. They're going to become a resource, and that Viola is going to be a blocker on board. If you play the Viola and your opponent doesn't clear it, which happens a lot, by the way, you will get to play your Sabo eventually, and I really like that, because Sabo and Viola will then serve the purpose of blockers. Sabo is giving her KO immunity, so Lucci can't get rid of her. And yeah, then you already have 2 blockers on board. So usually this deck, after you play the 8-cost Moria, is trying to loop double Sabos so that you have 2 blockers to prevent your opponent from just lethaling you. But since you have a Viola already on board, you can go 1 Sabo and 1 Ace, or 1 Sabo and 1 Luffy. It frees up your second brother slot to use for a different character rather than just going double Sabo. So I really do like Viola in the deck. I would never run her at less than 3 personally. I know a lot of people don't think that this card is all that needed, but I really, really like it. It makes a lot of awkward turns in the mid game just a lot safer. You get to be very safe, and again, if she stays on board, there's that huge advantage of not needing to use so many Sabos. You can go Sabo and then a different character of your choice. And then obviously we are playing Searchers, so we are running 2 of the 1-cost event. This just searches for any copy of Sabo, Luffy, or Ace, little or big. And of course, if you hit it and trigger, you get to activate the main effect. Pretty nice. Trigger barely ever comes up, but we're just running it as additional search because we are running 4 copies of Garp. Garp is obviously going to be better than the event because he's got 1k counter, but the exact same effect, you get to search for a Luffy, Sabo, or Ace, which is very clutch. So we've got our 4 copies of Garp over there. Then I'm going to show off the 2k counter lineup. We have 4 copies of Hiyori. Early game, this is just such a clutch card because you get to take 1 card from your life. Again, you don't really want your life in this leader. You want to drop down to 0 as quick as possible, while obviously not putting yourself in a situation where you can just be lethal by your opponent the following turn. So Hiyori is really nice. Lets you take a card from your life and then put one of your big brothers into your life. So you can put Ace, Sabo, or Luffy, depending on which corresponding little brother you have. And then after you swap it, after you swap the big brother into life, you can play the corresponding little one, activate its effect, trash it, play out the big brother from life. Your leader is now at 7k, and then if you played Ace, you get to rush. If you played Egghead Luffy, you get to blow something up, draw a card, whatever you need. Sometimes your plays are kind of determined by what your deck is giving you, rather than what's the optimal play, but a lot of times you really can sculpt your plays to what's best in that matchup, as long as you get a good amount of draw and searches early on. Speaking of draw, we're obviously running 4 copies of the Flampe. Again, 2k counter, so that's really helpful. But also on play, you may add 1 card from the top or bottom of your life, and then you get to draw 1 card from your deck. So that is super, super clutch. You're gonna basically use these very recklessly if you draw them early. You want to just slam those Flampes down, take a life, draw a card, and then oftentimes you will draw into these 1-cost events or Garp so that you can search, or maybe even another Flampe sometimes. So again, without, always make sure that you're not putting yourself in lethal range where your opponent can just kill you next turn. But yeah, you want to take your life, and then again in that mid game where your life is kind of low and you can take your last life, but then you can't really make any brothers plays off of it, take that last life, heal with your leader, and then put down a Viola to heal. Make those 2 life that you heal like a genuine heal. They'll go to your hand, they'll trigger, they won't go to bottom of deck. And then obviously our last 2k counter is going to be Makino. She lets you look at your life, so basically just get to take either your top or your bottom life and then rearrange the remaining ones. If you have big brothers already in your life, just by the sheer RNG of how your game started, this is going to be really, really clutch. So if I see this early game, I'll definitely play it. If I see it late game, probably not. At that point, might as well just save it to be a 2k counter. But yeah, if she comes up early, very, very good. Lets you drop in life count and then lets you gain some knowledge of your life so that you don't have to use Hiyori. You can just play your little brothers and just play your big brothers directly out of life. And then we are running 2 copies of the 10-cost Kuzan. I know this is a weird one. Kuzan is going to minus your opponent's entire board by 5 cost. On play, gets to pop a card with the cost of 0, so essentially something that has base 5 or less. So yeah, 10-cost Kuzan is really only there for the Bonnie matchup. I'm not gonna lie. If you're playing this deck just in a locals environment and you're confident you're not going to see Bonnie for whatever reason, if your scene just doesn't like Bonnie, don't bother with this card. Just replace him with like another big ace and another little ace probably. But yeah, 10-cost Kuzan absolutely wins the Bonnie matchup. It does require a lot of setup. Your whole goal is to establish a couple blockers, usually Viola and Sabo, and then establish your Jetpack Luffy, put one of those on board, and you don't want to take life as recklessly in that matchup, in the Bonnie matchup, so that when you do get to 10 Dawn, you can slam down Kuzan, you can KO whatever, little blocker they have, whether that's Rosinante or the Uruj. You can KO those with 10 cost Kuzans on play, and now that everything is -5, you can activate your Luffy that's already on board from the prior turn to pop an 8 cost Kid or a 9 cost Zoro. Again, Luffy is popping 4 costs. Under Kuzan, he can pop a 9 cost because Kuzan is minusing their entire board. So this will absolutely wreck Bonnie. They have no way to really answer this. The only card of theirs that can really escape from this combo is their 10 cost Dofi, but that is usually not the most influential boss monster in that matchup, so they're usually not going to go that route. They are going to go for 8 cost Kid or 9 cost Zoro. Those are much tougher for this deck. So if you drop that Kuzan successfully and then use Egghead Luffy to pop their Zoro or Kid, you are set from that point onwards. They can't take out your Kuzan, and you're just constantly going to be popping their big units by just recurring the Luffy, or if they just try to go for game, they're really not going to be able to win. Your leader's constantly going to be 9k, you start making your Moria plays. So I really like the 10 cost Kuzan. It's proven itself to me. In the Bonnie matchup, I think it's really your only route to a victory. That matchup is almost impossible otherwise. And then last but not least, we are running a 1 of Thunderbolt. So Thunderbolt is really nice in this deck. You can trash 1 card from your life, which again, you kind of want to do so that you can get down to 0 and use your leader ability. And then you can KO a 5 cost or less. This is really helpful in the Law matchup against the 5 cost Kid. If you get this early, you can just kill that. In the Bonnie matchup, really good against their Cavendish. You don't want them to keep getting that extra mileage out of all their Dawn with the Cavendish on board, so you can use this to KO that. Also just really helpful when you're going for game, kind of like I was saying with the little ace. The same way, you can kind of hold on to Thunderbolt in hand if you can afford it, and on that last turn where you're going for lethal, your opponent has a blocker that they're confident is going to sponge one of your hits. You just heal 2 with your leader ability, slam down that Thunderbolt, KO the blocker. For 2 Dawn, you've eliminated a whole, block that they were going to, sponge one of your hits with, and then you just get to blitz for game. I know running a 1 of is kind of quirky. Again, if I could run 2, I would. I just couldn't find the space for it. I consider it kind of like my, call me superstitious, but I'll call it my lucky card. It's just come up so many times that, it's 1 games for me. Against Lucci, if they're playing like the zombie Luffy, that's a 5 cost. Thunderbolt can KO that before it can do any damage. So I really like this. Again, it does come up more than you'd imagine, and it is just really synergistic with this leader's ability. So yeah, guys, that is the list. Again, if you want to see some gameplay with it, I will happily post that. I think most matchups you are kind of looking to do your bread and butter things. Bonnie and NL, I would say, are the most specific matchups where you want to play differently. Against Law, you're prioritizing the Jetpack Luffy and your aces, and this Luffy as well to some degree, although you can't really afford to use his ability that recklessly, because if you take the life, Law might be able to just lethal you, the turn afterwards. But yeah, against Law, definitely Jetpack Luffy to pop their units, and Ace to just be a 7k rusher that's threatening their life and is also not easily removable by their leader ability. Against Bonnie, you're prioritizing that Kuzan. You kind of want to avoid searching until you draw into him, or you want to hopefully mulligan for him at the beginning of the game. And then against NL, you really actually don't want to try to play the removal game. I thought Kuzan was the move against NL as well. It is most definitely not. You want to get as many of these 5 cost Luffys up on board against NL. Try to play your Sabos so that your units are safe from an Onami trigger out of life, and then just blitz them down. Just gun NL down constantly, demand cards from hand. If he has a rested character on board that you can swing at, go that route. Try to demand counters without the possibility of springing triggers from their life. But yeah, against NL, it is absolutely just a war of attrition. Do not try to play the long game of, playing the Kuzan and trying to remove their 9 cost Yamatos or 8 cost Katakuris with the Jetpack Luffy. The Rush Ace, the Yamatos, they will just overwhelm you eventually. That is probably one of the tougher matchups for this deck. You really do just have to blitz with as many of these Luffys as possible, as many of these aces as possible, and again, try to back it up with a Sabo every turn so that an Onami out of life is not going to kill you, and you have a blocker against whatever they try to swing at swing at you with next turn. Yeah, besides that, you really do just want to, you know, put your brothers in, try to make your Hiyori plays and your, Flampe plays early on in the game. Just take your life, put your big brothers in there with Hiyori, or stack them with Makino, and then play your little brothers to play them out of life, and just establish a scary board as soon as you can and try to get down to 0 life. But yeah, and then you're doing your bread and butter 10 Dawn play, slam down Moria, revive 2 little brothers, 2 Dawn on leader, put 2 big brothers into life, and then play both of them off of your little brothers and go for game. Against red decks, if you do come across any rogues running red, try to always, with this leader, we're usually trying to stick around 9k with no life and a bunch of these 5 costs on board. Against red, try to be 9k with 1 life left over, because if they just go unblockable with Diable Jambe or 5-cost Luffy or something like that, you know, they can just kill you, just completely bypassing your Sabo and your Viola blockers. So if you do come across any red decks, make sure to play it that way. Prioritize having 1 life left over after you make your Moria play. Yeah, I'm trying to think of any other advice I can think of, but that's really all I've got. If you guys want to see some games, definitely leave a comment down below. We will post some gameplay of this on the sim, or even maybe some commentated games in person. Yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think of this list. Let me know what decks you've been enjoying in this format and what profiles you want to see on the channel, and we will catch you in the next one. Peace.